So I guess we can, let me check the noise. Let's get the green light. Welcome everyone from Geneva. We're here for what in theory should be the final round of negotiations to agree on a legally binding global treaty to end plastic pollution. I'm very lucky today to be joined by three excellent speakers that can get to the heart of these discussions and explore their relevance for the climate crisis, which is the focus of this webinar. We have Juan Monterrey, who is Panama's special representative for climate change and probably a familiar face for many of you that follow environmental and climate diplomacy. We have David Azoulay, a senior attorney and director of the Environmental Health Program at CIEL. And last but not least, we have Erin Simon, head of plastic waste and business at WWF. Before we get to our speakers, I just want to give a little context to these negotiations and a bit of a state of play, as not everyone following might be so familiar with what's going on here. The negotiations began at the end of 2022. This is the sixth session, which in theory should have never happened because the treaty was meant to be finalized at the end of last year. But it was impossible to reach an agreement in South Korea then, and so countries decided to extend the negotiations. It is first worth reminding ourselves what the mandate for these negotiations is, which is to address the full life cycle of plastics. This is the wording that is used. Why is that important? Because, well, the interpretation, or some would argue the twisting of the words in the mandate, is one of the main reasons why this agreement is still not in sight. And that definition also holds the key as to why this is relevant for climate as well. Following that mandate, the majority of countries want a treaty that deals with plastic production and reduce that to sustainable levels. They argue that's the only way to get to grips with the plastic crisis. Plastic production is set to triple by 2060, according to the OECD, and recycling has not proven to be a solution. As Juan Carlos said on Saturday in the plenary, we cannot mop the floor while the pipe is gushing. But there is a group of predominantly fossil fuel producing countries, like Gulf countries, Russia, India, now the US. They see it differently. They've been very vocal in saying that the treaty should absolutely not touch plastic production and should only be about waste management. So there are two fundamentally different positions, which has caused a deadlock, as consensus is the preferred way of making decisions, and more on that later. The opposition of the fossil fuel producers to tackling plastic productions brings us to the connection with climate. Nearly all plastic is derived from oil, gas, and coal. And as the world sort of shifts away from using fossil fuels in energy system, very slowly, very gradually, the petrochemical sector is seen as a lifeline for many countries. So the risk there on the current trajectory is that greenhouse gas emissions from plastic production could almost triple by mid-century and account for nearly 1/3 of the global carbon, the remaining global carbon budget that is compatible with 1.5. So that's sort of the context and where we are at the moment. Let me first turn to Juan. You've been here working on these negotiations throughout the process and since last Tuesday. There's been very little meaningful progress, the same old arguments, position being made. With only now sort of 3 days left until the end, how can these discussions not end in failure, but result in a treaty that is meaningful, respects that mandate, and addresses both the plastic crisis and sort of helps the climate?
Thank you so much, Mateo, for this opportunity and to Climate Home News and these amazing panelists that we have here today. Let me begin by saying that unhinged plastic production is the petrochemicals industry's plan B. They have seen the line in the sand. They know that the world is moving away from fossil fuels and more into renewable energies, but they want to safeguard those practices that have hampered not only our economies, but also our health. And the unhinged production of plastic is what they want. That's why they have, infiltrated these negotiations. That's why we have hundreds of lobbies from this industry here, because they are trying to safeguard their own interest, their own profit to the detriment of everybody else. And yes, currently we are in a deadlock, and that has to do with this influence that is persistent. And there are many similarities with what happens, in the climate negotiations, the delay tactics, the stupid arguments that basically have no reasoning. But even more importantly, like I was mentioning, the infiltration of the petrochemical, how you call them, lobbies into the space. That's why we are in deadlock. And that's why we also need to speak to the people that are outside these rooms, because this treaty might be negotiated by diplomats and technical experts, but it's about you. It's about your rights, your right to clean air, your right to clean water, and your right to a body clean of poison.
Thank you very much, Juan. That's very important points that you made there. David, coming to you, you've done a lot of research, CIEL's done a lot of research about the presence of the lobbyists in the petrochemical industry. How does that sort of presence make itself felt on the negotiations in practice, and how big of an impact is that here?
So I think the way the presence of those lobbyists makes itself felt goes beyond what we hear directly from them. Where they've been particularly effective is that they've managed to either infiltrate country delegations, or they've managed to infiltrate the thinking of many countries and delegations who do believe that their future and the future of their development rests on building and developing more petrochemical facilities. And so the way it manifests really is you see countries defending positions that in the end, and look, to a certain extent, I believe that some of the delegates making these allegations truly believe that the future well-being of their country, economic development of the country, relies on or depends on their capacity to continue to develop fossil fuel petrochemical facilities. But I was speaking with an economist a few months ago who compared that a little to really investing everything on developing horse-drawn carriage at the beginning of the 20th century, when petrol and train was taking over, and you have the same industry who relies on horse-drawn carriage, oil and gas industry, were coming to these countries and telling them, look, it is worth for you to get in debt and borrow money to invest in building, but this is effectively building the future of their country on yesterday's technologies and yesterday's economy. And I think this is really a lot of the way that we're seeing these arguments being made, in addition to the traditional strategies from those industries, which is ignoring facts, questioning science, intimidating scientists, and really, again, just creating a reality of their own. This is how I see it manifest every day in the negotiations.
Thank you, David. And Erin, there's, as we're hearing, there's definitely part of the industry that is against the, highly ambitious treaty that tackles plastic production. But there are parts of the business world that want a good deal, and there is a sort of business coalition. Who are these industry players, and what does a good deal look for them out here?
Yeah, I mean, businesses are not a monolith, right? So we have to look at all of their different needs and expectations. And what's sort of interesting, right, is at the end of the day, it is the brands that are out there that have their logos all over the plastic. And so they are the ones that are being really held accountable for this, and they are the ones putting it on the marketplace. And so for the past few decades, they've been trying to ramp up their activities to take steps to use more recycled content, to change their design thinking, to use more reuse, and sort of set targets towards overall reduction, but they can't succeed without strong and consistent regulation. And so this patchwork of global legislation has created more uncertainty and more risk for them. And that has really led them to see this treaty as an opportunity to advocate for the business case for why this makes sense for them, why more harmonized rules can help and decrease their upfront costs and help them actually achieve the targets they've set out to do. I think there's just wide understanding that it's a really broken system, right? And not one of the solutions we're going to do, whether it's recycling or reuse or reduction, is going to be enough, but they understand it has to start with reduction, that they can't actually fix it if production continues to grow at the rate it is, because we're behind already, right? So that's why when the Business Coalition came together a few years ago and that are supported by WWF and Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it was, and with over 20 companies strong, it was really to first start with reducing plastic use and then think about how do we design it and get it back through circulation and reuse and recycling. So I think they're trying to partner with countries a bit more and say we want to invest. We want to be putting the right products on the marketplace, but we need harmonized global rules to do so.
Great, thank you.
If you allow me to add one thing to the business case, again, going back to the development of fossil fuel and petrochemicals, it's not just activists and NGOs saying this. Economists and credit rating agencies have been downgrading investment in petrochemical facilities for the past 2 years. Currently, the market for some of the core polymers is being oversupplied. We're seeing the rate of operation of production facility in China operating at around 50% production rate when they really need 90% to be profitable. And so this is where there is something a little irrational in that race to producing more and more and more, when you see when looking at the market, when looking at every indicators, that this is not needed. So it's really about trying to force a material that the world does not want and does not need, and that the market have actually already sent some of the signals that it doesn't make economic sense. This is where I'll leave it at that too.
I also want to contribute to this point because it's very important. It's the economic case. And as you mentioned, industry itself is asking governments to set a level playing field and standards globally. That's the experience that we have with our industry when we met for the consultations before coming into this round of negotiation. And exactly to David's point, and I mentioned this on my intervention in the last plenary, those countries that are advocating for something different than global rules are basically setting their economies for self-sabotage because the trend is already marked. And what we need out of this treaty is a strong signal to the market, similar to what we got back with the Paris Agreement that ignited the boom in solar, the boom in renewables, and the boom in electric mobility. Yes, there are issues with all these new industries too, but at least the boom is there and we are guided towards the direction that we have to go. So very important point about the level playing field.
Yeah, thank you very much for making that point. In terms of the kind of end game, how do we get out of here with a deal and not again without a deal as it happened in Busan? How can the more ambitious countries how can they make that happen? Juan, what are the options available to make that happen?
We need to go back to the original mandate. And the original mandate that we had here was to address plastic pollution across the entire life cycle of plastic. And there is pollution in every step of this life cycle. And the life cycle starts with the production of the polymers that are the raw materials to all the other plastic products that we use. And we need to remember that every ton of plastic that we produce comes with a carbon bill. Every time that we generate a plastic product, we are making it more difficult to fight the climate crisis. And without production limits, the greenhouse gas emissions from the petrochemical industry will expand and will shy away from a carbon budget that is already in limited numbers. So this is not only about pollution, this is about survival to make sure that we keep the climate crisis under control, but it's also a safeguard on health. All three in just one treaty. And that's what we need. And also, let's remember that the majority of us, not only member states, but also civil society, constituencies here, and the majority of you out there, the billions of people that are not sitting in this room, you all want this. And the majority of nations, aligned with the High Ambition Coalition and Friends, which is north of 100 countries, also want this. We have been moving and moving and moving and giving and giving and giving, but others have not moved an inch for over a year and a half. And what we need everyone is to show solidarity, extend the branch. We have been doing it for over a year and we need everybody to do it.
And if these other countries keep like where they are and they don't move an inch, what can be done? What is the alternative there?
I think, the ambitious countries are doing their job here inside, but we also need people outside these rooms to do their job. So all of you watching, from where you are, you also have power because pressure moves mountains, but it also moves negotiators. So we need you all to call, to write to your authorities. We need you to flood them, share information, show up, protest in front of the ministries in your capital cities that are representing your government here, because we need pressure from all over. Those of you that work in the media, keep shining the light, make obstruction impossible for those that want to hide in the darkness. So I don't want to prejudge what is going to come out on Thursday. What I can say right now is that we all need to dialogue. None of us, all of you watching, all of us sitting here, we're doing enough, but we need to do more.
Great, thank you. And David, coming to you, there's been quite a lot of discussion in the corridors, at least, about the option of voting. So as I was saying initially, consensus is the sort of preferred way of making decisions, but consensus sometimes can be used as a weapon, arguably, and it's also a power of veto. So is this voting option viable, and how would that work in practice?
So I'll try to answer your question, and I'll try not to answer the question about how would that work, because, well, I'm a legal nerd, so I would love to get into this, but I don't think people actually do want to get into this. The first point to make around this is that it is legally possible to vote in this process.
Yes.
It has been argued by some countries that it is not possible. After the drama and circus that was created in Paris during the INC2, and they effectively laid a number of procedural traps to make it potentially politically costly or timely, or to make it more complicated But from a strict legal perspective, which is as a legal nerd, from where I like to look at things, it is absolutely legally possible to vote in this process. Of course, you have something to vote on, and that is also something that negotiators are working on to develop a text that can gather the support, that does gather the support of the numbers necessary to win the vote. Now, another thing to remind ourselves in this respect is that every single multilateral environment agreement that has been adopted since the past 70 years, basically, including, the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, the Montreal Protocol, like everything, included a possibility to vote in the rules of procedure that it worked. Voting was never used, but that's the whole point of voting. When you know that you can vote, you don't have to vote, because it then creates an incentive for everyone to find some common ground, because nobody wants to find themselves in the position to lose a vote. And so when people read the room, and see that they're trying to defend positions that only a very few number of countries are defending, then it creates the incentive for finding compromises. So that's for the negotiation and adoption of treaties. Another thing to note is that there are treaties where, in terms of implementation, their voting is not possible, because the same strategies that have been tried here have been used, including, many of you will be familiar with what's happening in the context of the UNFCCC. And there you see the opposite. You know from the get-go that voting is impossible, because the rules of procedure have been bracketed by a Gulf country on the very first COP, which they try to redo here. And what happens when voting is not possible? You have circular, endless conversations about basic facts and science. And the final thing to note, and this is why voting is powerful, and sometimes you don't have to use it, just to recognize that it can be used. And the last thing I'll note is there are arguments around this, but multilateralism is consensus. I'm not going to utter the word that comes to my mind when I hear that. I will basically try to say it more politely and say this is complete and utter nonsense. The heart of multilateralism is the United Nations in New York General Assembly. Everything is voted on all the time over there. And this is the heart of multilateralism. Yes. There are many agreements that have been adopted where articles were voted one by one on cybercrime, on international taxation, and others. International environment regulation wanted to set itself apart and say, yeah, but here we're doing technical things and not political things, so we're different. But it may have worked up to a certain point. But now the politicization has been brought by the very country who want to impose the status quo and want to prevent the general awareness and understanding that is rising about those issues to be transformed into action. So now it's time for us to use all the tools that multilateralism has, because this is not weakening multilateralism. This is saving it. Using the tools that we have is saving multilateralism. Abandoning the tools, this is what weakens and undermines multilateralism.
And on this point, how much, and feel free, whoever wants to pitch in on this, how much appetite do you sense there is from countries in using this option?
I think one optimistic thing in this area, maybe not in this process, but is in the proposal that has been supported by 120 countries on Article 20, which is, for those of you who don't live in article language,
bless you.
Bless you. It's how essentially it includes how we will implement, how we will manage our COP process. And right now, 120 countries agree that we should have the threat of a vote in that process. So I think, while that isn't overseeing this INC process, it does show that the majority of the countries here actually don't want to sit on their hands for the next decade or two and spiral on science and debates. They want to be able to start and strengthen, because this is it's a really complicated systemic change that we need the planet to make in a very coordinated way. We know we can't solve all of that in the first document. So that start and strengthen it's necessary that we can have tough conversations to do that.
Great, thank you for that. We got a question coming in from our audience, and everyone else watching, feel free to put it into the chat if you have any more questions. So the question is, if it's not possible to set caps on plastic production in any pact that emerges from Geneva, what could it include that would allow for that later? And how might that be done? Would this idea be acceptable for fossil fuel producing countries? I don't know if Juan, you want to go on that one?
That's a tough one. Let's go back to the mandate. The mandate asked us to address the full life cycle of plastic. It literally says full. It doesn't say part of the life cycle. It doesn't say partially the life cycle. It doesn't say some of the life cycle. It says the full life cycle. So the worst outcome here for Panama is not this agreement. The worst outcome for us is an agreement so weak that it will change nothing. Mm-hmm. That is the worst outcome. There are more than 15 multilateral environmental agreements. The ministers of environment have turned into publishing houses because we have so many responsibilities for each one of them that we get busy writing. By the time we finish one, we need to enter the other one, and we never have time to implement. So if we're going to add a weak agreement to this list of requirements and a weak agreement that will get us to nothing, then we're not going to sign up for that. We're not going to be there for that. So here we're not negotiating, the minimum political option. Here we're looking for the best option that can ensure that mid to long term, our babies will not be born poisoned the same way that they are now. Mid to long term, our soils are as fertile as they can be, and the fertility is not hampered by the amount of microplastics that we have in our soil, that then it turns into our food, that then we ingest it, and it creates, cancers. And there are like about 1,500 studies that outline, every impact that different type of plastics have in human health. And today, someone taught me that there is actually not a single study that can ensure that any of the plastics that we have is actually safe, not even the ones that we use in our cars. So we need production as part of this agreement, because production is part of the full life cycle, and that's what we're fighting for.
To build on that a little bit, if you think about it, if our outcome that we're trying to work for is to end plastic pollution along the life cycle, right? And that is the full life cycle. Like, how do you start? Well, Article 3 says, why don't we start with those things that we know are problematic in the first place? It's trying to get the countries to even create a tactic to deliver on that outcome. There's a lot of different tactics you can use, right? But that is one that feels like it's got a lot that they can line up behind, right? Like, let's make a list of the things that are already being banned, that are being voluntarily banned by companies or not used. And then let's create some criteria, and let's make a plan for it. And then let's make sure that we're doing that for chemicals and products. And then let's create design guidelines in Article 5 on how to make them better with more transparency, so that we can start to avoid these things, right? That is not a full cap, but that is like, there are other elements even beyond the discussion of like Article 6, which is around getting to that direct supply. These are all key elements that are necessary to keep reducing, because we are, at this point in time, and coming back to that, the first way to clean up a mess is to turn off the tap, not just get out the mop, is that tap is flowing so fast right now. Mm-hmm. And in the next 15 years, it is going to double the amount coming out of it. And if we can't manage it now, like, how are we, it's just not physically possible to address it without, fully like addressing that upstream, and that, it's just really, it's like, to say that you can do it without doing that is just to not understand completely what is happening. And I don't feel like that's actually the case. I just think there's a desire not to.
Thank you. I'll build on that, and I promise we haven't rehearsed, but I'm going to build directly. What you've been saying is, in addition to the points that you've mentioned, there are additional pieces that are element to come to the point where decision to actually restrict put a cap, put a number of the amount of plastic that we should be producing or not be producing can be done. The first is to include language about sustainable production and consumption of plastic. And one may think that this is revolutionary language, but really this is language that exists in the SDGs. The SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals from the UNEP that have been adopted and agreed language by everyone for over a decade. So bringing it that kind of language with the possibility that Erin was mentioning earlier about taking decision. The most important thing that needs to be done is to clarify in the instrument that the treaty has a mandate within its scope to actually deliver this, and then ensure that it can make decision. And then there are additional pieces that are necessary to get there, because it's very difficult to regulate something in which you have very little information. And so the sort of reporting that is needed on the what is being produced, by whom, where to go where, is also a key element to build into this. And then the last piece of the story that will strengthen the possibility is the regular review of the efficiency and efficacy of the treaty. The treaty has to clarify that every few years, it has to be able to go back, look at how well it's delivering. And if it's not delivering, then has the capacity to adopt more measures, more action that can lead eventually to this. None of us who have seen the damages of plastic pollution want to wait for that to happen. And this is what we're fighting, and this is why we believe that it has to be done absolutely now. But if we're not able to do this now, I'm very confident that by just looking at, all right, this is what you want to do just this, let's do this, but let's bet together. If it hasn't delivered the result that we expect within 4 years or within 5 years, then we'll do this other thing that we've been saying is necessary. That is also another types of mechanism that can be built into the treaty in order to get there. Is it enough? No, it's not enough, but it's international law. It's never enough.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
Yes.
no international issue has ever been solved just with a treaty. But also, none of these issues can be solved without a treaty that established the basic ground rules and the basic level field for that to happen.
And I mean, obviously, the fossil fuel producing nations, the ones that are against tackling production, they probably don't know about this other way of putting it in. So, going back to the original question, would this alternative avenue to tackle production, would this also be unacceptable for them?
Well, it depends who, but as I was saying, China is the #1 producer of plastic today. They nationally already controlling the production of some of the key polymers because they see that market-wise it doesn't make sense. Some of their facility are operating, as I said, at 50% operational rate. They need better prices. They need better, and they know that this is the way. They may not be willing and ready to have a clear target being imposed on them now, but they know that in the long term, this is what they need. So yes, I do believe that for those countries that are negotiating in good faith, and it is the vast majority of them, even beyond the ambitious countries, there are a small group of countries that are not negotiating in good faith. Very frankly speaking, the core oil and gas producing countries, what does it play for them is not just it's not a question of economy. It's the survival of their power structure. Their power, them remaining in power at the national level, and the power they exert in the world depends on their capacity to continue to explore that. So of course they have no interest in accepting anything, but that's fine. They're just a very small number of players. But some of the, I would say, more rational players that are much more important, like the major economies of our world, like the Chinese, like the Brazilian, they're seeing this and they know that it is in their interest. So I do think that this is something that is absolutely acceptable for them.
Right, thank you. Another question that's come in. Any thoughts or predictions on how the 70 or so ministers that are arriving in Geneva tomorrow will be able to resolve these differences at a higher level? What role can they play? How realistic is it that they will make a meaningful difference?
So the current mode of work is definitely not working. You know, the structure that we've had for the past week or so is not delivering the results that we need or advancing as fast as we need it. So Panama does see a role for the political level representatives to engage. We do see the opportunity for the share to change the arrangements and the modality of works to include this representative. However, there are some nations that don't want that because when you get to a negotiation at the political level, it's all about trade-off. So the negotiators get antsy, and negotiators are highly technical and nerds on their topics.
Yeah.
So they get, well, not all of them. The ones in good faith, I think they are, but they get nervous when a political level staffer comes and make those decisions. But I also want to mention something from the previous round. Sustainable production and consumption, that wording is already part of the UNEA resolution mandate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's already there. We already agree on that wording. And also, there are some massive nations that have been shown amazing good faith. And China has done it. China has shown good faith. There is an Article 7 that relates to leakages or pollution that comes out of the different steps of the life cycle. And China made a proposal on manufacturing being included in this section. The leakages for manufacturing. So they are showing good faith.
Yes.
There is a leadership vacuum that big nations need to identify and take over ownership on that. Indonesia is another big producing nation. And just this week, they proposed a revised text on Article 6 that includes production on it. So, big producer countries understand the economic dynamics. They know what lays in the future, but there is still like another group that we need to push and push and push. And lastly, in this time in history when we are seen as so divided, so fractured, I think this treaty can give us, something that we can hang into, that there is still hope for global community, that there is still hope for multilateralism, and that we can agree that doing things that are good for our health in a planetary level is the way to go.
Great, thank you. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on the ministers, how much or hopes shall we pin on them?
The one thing I'll add, and I will not comment on how much hope I put on ministers because I should not do that on the record. But the one thing I will add is thinking that those negotiations are only happening here and are not already being discussed at the higher level is a complete delusion. We've heard reports recently, I mean, we've seen in the press, some countries sending letters to the high level of governments. And so we know that this is already happening. This one came out in the press because some countries were willing to talk about it. Other kinds of pressure that happens way above the level of the negotiators that are here are already happening. So bringing the people of that level into the room and getting them face to face is a chance to also have a sort of reality check. Hey, this is what we're really talking about. This is what we're engaging with here, and let's at least recognize it. And so that could help also untangle some of the things, even though the nerds like me are going to feel a little disempowered. But it's okay.
Great, thanks, Erin. We have another question coming in, and it says, this deadlock over the limits on plastic production has long been present, these negotiations, as we said. What, if anything, has changed, and have countries doubled down, or have more countries joined those opposing production cap? And maybe you can also get into the US position here, which has changed, if that has played any factors. I don't know who.
What I can mention is that over the past week and a half, more countries have joined the ambitious side. More countries have joined. We're getting stronger. On top of that, like I mentioned, you have some big players that are also big producers like China and Indonesia that are showing good faith, that are, proposing stuff to get us to a landing zone. So I do see, some openings and some opportunities for landing zones, but we also need other countries to extend the branch. I have felt the movement. I have seen the movement. I see the newcomers. I see these massive countries showing good faith, and we need others to do so.
And the other thing that have happened over the past 2 years is how the market has reacted to this. Like I said, Braskem, the #1 giant from Brazil producing petrochemical, its grade has been downgraded twice over the past 18 months by all the rating agencies. People are looking, people are taking notice, governments are seeing and saying, there must be another way. There must, and so these are the things that are also happening where the understanding, it took a few years to go from plastic is a problem of a straw in a turtle's in their nose to wait, plastic is an issue along its life cycle and it's about the material, it's not just about waste. Well, just as this time was actually quite fast from an international legal perspective, the understanding from we have to protect our national development interests to wait, maybe your development interests do not lay where we thought they were is also taking place. And this is why we've seen the evolution from the first INCs to Busan, where we saw 100 countries coming together behind, no, wait, production is at the core of the treaty and we need to do this. And now we came from Busan to Geneva with what Juan Carlos was saying, with even countries who are saying, you know what, I think we should also be looking at this because it's not possible not to look at this. So this is what's happening and this is the movement that what we're seeing. Are the opposition getting entrenched? Of course, because they're also seeing this and they're, like I said, they're defending and reacting to this. But this is where multilateralism has a number of tools that can allow the world to keep moving and not be blocked by a few countries who are absolutely attached and entrenched to the status quo. The status quo means not continued pollution, worsen pollution to a place where it will become unlivable. So there is no choice. And most of the countries are seeing this, and this is the kinds of evolution that we're seeing.
And you see that in the numbers on the proposals around those articles that are touching on it, right? They are growing.
Yeah.
And they have been growing. I mean, we had the Nice wake-up call. Like, there is a growing number of countries who are trying to throw their weight behind the need for this to be really holistic and actually have a chance at doing what they set out to do in March of 2022.
And this is happening despite the intimidation and pressure that is put at the high level. So imagine if you didn't have those very small but powerful forces trying to prevent change from happening. It would have happened already.
I also gotta mention two other, big nations that have shown amazing good faith and leadership. South Africa and Japan.
Yeah.
They have been pushing, proposals to try to get us to a landing zone. So also kudos to them and like more power to them, some good energy to these amazing countries that are trying to get us to a treaty and will become the superheroes of this on Thursday.
And it shows the validity of the strategy of those ambitious countries to actually have hold the line. I mean, we know in the UN and other places, there are pressures to start compromising and letting go because they want to go. But what is happening this week is demonstrating that not giving up and compromising on ambition is the right political strategy. It works and it will pay out for them as well.
Great. Your mention of South Africa brings me neatly to another question that's coming. What is the position of African countries here who produce less plastic but feel the consequences? And I would add, is there a unified position among African countries, or is there some sort of divisions there? I don't know if anyone has any.
So the African position is based on a mandate, a declaration that was adopted at AMCEN, the African Minister of Environment Conference, that solidifies and settles their position, and they're largely unified against it. Are there some tension within the African group for some countries to try to break away from this? Yes, of course there is. Either by countries who are under tremendous pressure by some of their trade partners to try to break that away, or from countries who I believe are being misled in promises that their future lies in developing their petrochemical capacity and who see themselves as the new giant of the future. Again, we go back to the early 20th century, and that is investing in a future that is based on the past. And that I don't think will work. But so far, we've seen a largely unified African position with some tensions, but hey, what region doesn't have these kinds of tensions? And I think it's pretty fair because it is a complex issue. But so far, we're continuing to see that. And again, that is thanks to a leadership of the African ministers of the environment that solidified their position in previous AMCEN meeting.
Great, thank you. I have a question for you, Erin. We've talked a lot about the pressure from the petrochemical industry, and they are very vocal about what they want, and they're here in big numbers. What about the more ambitious kind of business community? Have they been vocal enough in making their case? And what more should they do in this sort of crucial moment?
I think the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, like I mentioned earlier, which is represented by over 200 multinational companies, has been here. They've been here actually before they were fully formed. They were at UNEA 5.2 when the resolution was adopted. And I think they have done a really good job of keeping a really consistent message, of sitting down with all governments and talking about how their asks, their desire for global rules, how that benefits them, and then in turn, how that creates more certainty for them and how it de-risks them, and how that will really result ultimately in more funding, right? Because at the end of the day, even talking back to those countries that are not producing today, right? They are inundated with plastics. They often do not have the right infrastructure collection for recycling reuse. And they have no control over how those products are made, right? And so when these companies are saying to them, hey, we know that it is already, you are very overwhelmed by the task at hand, but we are here to partner with you on those solutions moving forward. And partnering looks like, one, regulation so that anything that ends up in your country is matching a design standard. And two, helping you with the right systemic change there for providing the right products for your infrastructure. If you are an area that is focused on reuse, putting reuse solutions in place, and then paying the extended producer responsibility fees for the collection and cleaning and refill of those through that type of infrastructure. If it's a place where it's about designing for recycling for existing infrastructure or improved ones, making sure that they are matching their products with that infrastructure. And of course, at the end of this, purchasing that material back, right? Because they need to be supporting that back of the supply chain that is now being established. And so is that enough? I mean, I think as an environmental NGO, I can't say that any company is doing enough, right? But I think they have come in with an intention to try to really be a part of the positive systemic change for this. You see their messages around. They try to have all those conversations. I do think that a lot of non-private sector folks are confused by the vast number of folks who are private sector, who are business, right? Early on, especially, there was an adaptation of language, right? So you would see one group using language around how we want to move to the circular economy, and another would adapt that, but mean something totally entirely. And these delegations, these government delegations were like, well, you're saying the same thing, because, they didn't understand, the nuance there. And that doesn't really, it's really, that makes things challenging. And so that's why the simplification and the common language that they've been using has gotten to where it has. So I don't think I fully answered that and said that it was enough, but I think I am proud of that effort, because I think there is good intention there, even if as imperfect as it can be at times.
Of course. There's a direct question for you, Juan, if you want to address it. Asking, can you give specific examples of why you say China, Indonesia, and Japan are negotiating in good faith? You sort of mentioned that already,
Yes.
and that's proposals that put forward. And following up on that, would you say the treaty outcomes could hinge on those countries? As China is the world's biggest plastic producers, Japan is one of the biggest packaging waste producer, and Indonesia is greatly affected by plastic pollution. Does it hinge on them to a large extent?
Yes, the reason why I say that these three countries are negotiating in good faith is because in the middle of the negotiation, they have put forth textual proposals that guide us towards where we need to be at. For example, China provided some textual proposal on Article 7 that has to do with leakages, mentioning that we need to look at, the pollution and the leakages across, the entire manufacturing of products. Japan provided a landing zone proposal to try to bridge, the corners in terms of the level of ambition that we should have on Article 6, which relates to production. And also South Africa did the same. So that's why I say that they're negotiating in good faith. And that's why I say that they have advanced a little bit more in their positions, because they didn't do that in Busan. They didn't do that, a few months ago, but they're doing it here. And why are they doing it? Precisely because of David mentioned. They have understood and they can see clearly the economic case. And it is in their best interest to have the level playing field and the global standards so that we can all engage and enact that new wave of prosperity that doesn't include plastic and it doesn't include toxins in our bodies.
Great, thank you. Are there any other countries that you see as leaders that, it is their moment to step up?
I mean, we've seen a number of countries bringing leadership over to get us where we are now. I mean, we have to acknowledge the role that certain countries in each region, in CRULAC, Panama, Peru was one of the proponent of the original resolution. Like Colombia has been pushing this and linking it to other issues. They've been playing a tremendous role. Mexico on Article 3 around has really been playing a major role. In Africa, we have seen countries stepping up, from Senegal to Ghana to Rwanda and others, who have brought us where we are. In Asia Pacific, the pieces who have a lot to say about this, because their livelihood, their very existence is being threatened by the common scourge of climate change, which is plastic is a climate change issue, and waste and ocean waste, the livelihood depend on that. And they've been providing a sort of thought leadership and ambition leadership that is very important. The EU, Switzerland has been providing a lot of leadership around the toxicity and the health impacts. The EU and France have been doing tremendous work, bringing the Nice Declaration. So really, you see a lot of leadership that has happened so far. And I think what is important at this point, and Juan Carlos identified a number of countries who are coming, we're stepping up, who may have not been showing this leadership, but also what we've seen this kind of run, it's like a relay run. You cannot ask one only country to carry the main load all the way to the end. The way it works in multilateralism is I carry it for as far as I can. And then I pass it on to someone who comes in with fresh energy and something, who helps me carry it. And you don't get to the end zone by just having either the same person carrying to the end or just passing it to one to the other, but just adding more and more people to carrying the same load. And as you carry it, it becomes lighter and lighter and becomes easier to actually bring it to the end. And I'm sorry for the weird metaphors.
No, it's perfect. It's really good.
Yeah, it's good to bring it, with metaphors. It makes it more realistic. And one question that we can hear everyone's thoughts on, is no deal better than a weak deal, and why, if so?
Panama does not need an international agreement to put in order its waste management system. We don't need an international rule to do that. That is the role of the municipalities with the Ministry of Environment and the Authority of Waste. So if we get a treaty that is only about waste management, we're not up for it, because that's not the mandate. That's not what we have been working towards, and that's not what we need.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think a treaty that is nothing gets us back to where we started.
Exactly.
Right? Like, we all go back and say, we acknowledge there's a problem, we're going to put our own plan in place. That's why we came together, was because we acknowledged as a global community, we couldn't do this alone. We had to work together. And so if we don't, that's really going to be problematic. And I think the countries who are impacted the most by this are going to have the heaviest load in solving for it. And the way we can make that load lighter is by making sure that every one of their dollars and efforts goes the longest way. And that's by creating harmonization for them, right? That's by setting them up for success for the economic models they're going to put into place. And by not continuing to flood them with plastic pollution while they're, trying to swim out of it and create a system of circularity. So I think that there are countries that will fare a lot better than others with an empty agreement, and then the ones that are disproportionately impacted on all things will just continue to bear the load.
And I'll go beyond that. It's not just that it takes us to where we were a few years ago. It actually sets us back because we're already seeing when groups of countries, regions, or other are starting to take initiatives. Then countries say, wait, we're going to have the plastic treaty. And imagine you have a plastic treaty that doesn't actually solve the problem. Everywhere and every time some countries will try to step up and raise the issue in a new forum, people will say, we don't have to do this. We have the plastic treaty. Mm-hmm. So it's not only setting us back, it's also fossilizing us into the current status quo and preventing us from doing the action. And what's interesting is we're already seeing this. There's a question of pellets. So pellets, are those small little things, nurdles. In French, they're called mermaid's tears, which I think is very cool. Those pellets they're the raw material, basically. This is what most of the plastic objects are being manufactured of. And they're a major problem because they're very small, they leak a lot, there's a lot of leakage about this. And in the context of the IMO, some countries said, well, we have to look at the transport of pellets because a lot of leakage happens during the transport that happens on the ocean.
Yeah.
To which some countries in the Gulf raised up and said, we're going to do this in the plastic treaty. And now that same countries are looking into the plastic treaty and they're thinking, should we do about pellets? Nah, pellets are not really a problem. So if, for example, pellets or production or other issues are not covered by this treaty, it will still provide an excuse for not acting on this everywhere else where it should be done. Mm-hmm. So that is why no treaty, to a certain extent, is better than no treaty. Now, of course, the real question is, what is a bad treaty and what is a good treaty? And we may all have different nerdy explanation about this, but we can all agree a bad treaty is one that doesn't tackle the problem at the source throughout the life cycle. And a bad treaty is a treaty that does not allow it to grow and to make decision to actually strengthen implementation as we understand the problem grows. That, I think, is something that we can all agree on.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A bad treaty is one that cannot stand the test of time.
Exactly.
Would if a bad treaty was put on the table, bad treaty from your perspective, would Panama consider sort of leaving the room? Or?
Panama never leaves a room, but if it comes to voting, we will not be voting for that.
Okay,
and good. Also, there's a question about, we've been hearing about consensus. Why would consensus only play in the direction of having the lowest common denominator? We've seen before, and I know that this is a climate-focused conversation. We've seen what happened in Copenhagen, for example, when a bad proposal is put forth by a small number of countries and being forced down on other countries. Well, the countries who are most suffering from it will go, we're not going to be down with this. We're not going to accept this. And so it's not so much about leaving the room. It's about standing up for what we've been saying in the past. And we've been hearing it consistently from small delegation to PCITS to bigger delegation to the EU. There are red lines. And if there are red lines, a treaty that crosses those red lines is just not going to be a treaty that is going to be accepted.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned the PCITS, within the PCITS, countries that have shown incredible leadership, you got Palau, you got Fiji, Micronesia, Cook Islands, they're working hard.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I think we are kind of run out of time by now. And it's been a very interesting and insightful discussion, I think. Thank you all. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, David. Climate Home is here. We'll be continuing our coverage of the talks and until the bitter end. So keep checking our website for the latest updates. Thank you everyone for watching and following us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for convening us.